The version of Brainstorm you saw in theaters was nearly a completely different movie. You know the VR headsets. But do you know about the hell footage that was too disturbing to release?
Well, hell's crazy.
Or the insurance company that literally bought the film from MGM? Most fans don't realize the lead actress drowned before filming finished. Her sister had to secretly replace her.
This film is it's a series of experiments.
Experiments? Really? Today, we're uncovering 16 hidden truths about Brainstorm, including a subplot so dark that it helped create the PG-13 rating and changed Hollywood forever. Let's get into it. 1. The insurance sabotage. When Natalie Wood tragically drowned in November 1981 near the end of filming, MGM didn't want to finish Brainstorm. They saw an opportunity. Instead of finding a way to complete the movie, they tried to collect a massive insurance payout by declaring the film undeliverable due to the loss of the lead actress. A cold, calculated business decision that would have buried the film forever. Director Douglas Trumbull fought back. He proved he could finish the story using existing footage, careful editing, and body doubles for the remaining shots. Lloyd's of London, the insurance company, was so impressed by Trumbull's determination that they stepped in with their own funding to complete the film.
This is perfectly wonderful, thoughtful.
They effectively took the project away from MGM. An insurance company became a de facto studio to save a movie that the actual studio wanted dead. One of the strangest financial arrangements in Hollywood history. 2. The death retreat. To prepare the cast for Brainstorm's heavy themes about death, consciousness, and the afterlife, Douglas Trumbull took the lead actors to the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, a famous center for experimental psychology and human potential studies. Trumbull's original plan was to have the actors take hallucinogenic drugs to simulate death and access altered states of consciousness. When that proved too legally risky and potentially dangerous, they pivoted to something almost as intense: rebirthing therapy, intense emotional exercises, breathing techniques, group therapy sessions designed to break down psychological barriers. Christopher Walken later described the rehearsal process as heavy group therapy that left the cast emotionally raw and vulnerable. An unconventional preparation technique that gave the performances a genuine weight and unease you can't fake with traditional acting methods. 3. The screen-shifting innovation. Douglas Trumbull wanted audiences to physically feel the difference between reality and the virtual world inside the Brainstorm headset. His solution was radical. The film actually changes aspect ratios mid-scene, something almost no other movie had ever done. Real-world scenes were shot in standard 35mm with normal sound. But the instant a character puts on the helmet and enters a recorded memory, the screen physically expands into 70mm widescreen format. The audio suddenly explodes into multi-channel stereo. The effect is overwhelming and disorienting. Exactly what Trumbull intended. Theaters had to be specially equipped to handle the format changes. Projectionists had to be trained to execute the shifts perfectly, a technical nightmare that most audiences never consciously noticed. But it fundamentally shaped their experience of the film. 4. The showscan rejection Brainstorm was originally designed to use showscan, a revolutionary filming process that Douglas Trumbull had invented, which shot at 60 frames per second, 2.5 times faster than standard 24 frames per second cinema. The higher frame rate created an almost hyper-real visual quality that was supposed to make the Brainstorm sequences feel overwhelming and alien. Studios and theater chains rejected it completely. Retrofitting thousands of theaters to handle 60 frames per second projection would cost tens of millions of dollars. Nobody would pay for it. Trumbull was forced to abandon showscan and pivot to the 35mm/70mm hybrid format we see in the final film. We never got to see Trumbull's full vision. Showscan technology was essentially abandoned by Hollywood, resurfacing decades later when Peter Jackson experimented with high frame rates for the Hobbit films, a compromise that haunts the movie's legacy. 5. Natalie Wood's sister stepped in. While Natalie Wood had completed most of her major dramatic scenes before her death, Several crucial continuity shots and transitions were still missing. To finish the film, Douglas Trumbull brought in Wood's younger sister, Lana Wood, to serve as a body double. Lana filmed scenes from behind, in shadow, or from extreme distances where her face couldn't be clearly seen. Trumbull also combed through hours of outtakes and alternate takes from earlier in production, reconstructing Natalie's performance for the finale using footage that had originally been rejected. Most viewers can't tell which scenes feature Natalie and which feature Lana, but it's deeply sad. The entire final act of the film is a ghost performance, assembled from fragments and substitutions after the actress was already gone. 6. The first VR warning released in 1983, Brainstorm is widely credited as one of the first films to accurately predict the dangers of virtual reality technology. The film's plot centers on a brain-computer interface that allows users to record and play back human experiences, which is eventually seized by the military for interrogation, brainwashing, and psychological torture. These themes predated The Matrix, Inception, Black Mirror, and the entire modern discourse about VR addiction by decades. Trumbull and his writers understood instinctively that any technology capable of accessing human consciousness would inevitably be weaponized. They built that paranoia into the film's DNA. It's frighteningly prophetic, especially as modern VR companies push headsets into mainstream markets with minimal discussion of psychological risks. 7. Christopher Walken's directorial input. The production of Brainstorm was reportedly in utter chaos because Douglas Trumbull allowed Christopher Walken enormous creative freedom. Walken would frequently go off script and rewrite entire exchanges based on what felt emotionally true in the moment. This frustrated the original screenwriter, who felt the movie was being rewritten on the fly by an actor who didn't understand the larger structure of the story. But Trumbull believed in Walken's instincts and gave him space to experiment. The result is a performance that feels genuinely unpredictable and dangerous. The tension between the scripted scenes and Walken's improvised moments creates a strange tonal inconsistency that either makes the film more interesting or more incoherent, depending on your perspective. Yet another example of how Brainstorm was made without a clear captain steering the ship. 8. The heart attack recording. The scene where Louise Fletcher's character records her own fatal heart attack is one of the most disturbing sequences in the film. It was so convincing that the crew reportedly panicked during filming, unsure if Fletcher was actually in medical distress. The light at the end of the tunnel effects were created using practical techniques. A bright quartz bulb shining through scratched plastic to create the tunneling effect, intercut with high-speed footage of dancers shot in extreme slow motion to create the rivers of angels. It's a masterclass in practical effects work that holds up remarkably well against modern CGI. Fletcher's performance is so raw and terrifying that it's genuinely hard to watch. You don't need gore or violence to create something genuinely disturbing, just honest human suffering. 9. Predicting the loop. Here's the subplot that helped change Hollywood ratings forever. One of Brainstorm's most disturbing storylines involves a technician who splices a recording of a sexual encounter into a continuous loop, then plays it on repeat until the sensory overload leaves him in a catatonic state. The film treats this sequence with the gravity of a drug overdose, showing the character essentially brain damaged by his inability to disconnect from the loop. This concept of digital addiction, the idea that recorded pleasure could be weaponized into self-destruction, was incredibly adult and prescient for 1983. It predates our modern understanding of dopamine addiction, infinite scroll, social media, and algorithmic pleasure by decades. The fact that Brainstorm tackled this in a mainstream studio film is remarkable, and it was rated PG. We'll get to that. 10. The 70mm record. At the time of its release, Brainstorm had the largest order of 70mm prints in cinematic history, even more than Return of the Jedi, which had been released earlier the same year. MGM marketed the film as the ultimate experience, emphasizing the technical spectacle and screen-shifting format changes as the primary reason to see it in theaters. They knew the story was dark and uncommercial, so they leaned heavily on the idea that this was a sensory event rather than just a movie. The strategy partially worked. Brainstorm became a cult favorite among cinephiles and technical enthusiasts who appreciated the craftsmanship. But printing and distributing that many 70mm copies was enormously expensive. The film could never recoup those costs at the box office. 11. The Wright Brothers Connection. The climax of Brainstorm was filmed at the Wright Brothers National Memorial in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, where the first powered airplane flight took place in 1903. Douglas Trumbull chose this location deliberately. He wanted to create a symbolic connection between two revolutionary moments in human history, the conquest of physical flight and the potential conquest of consciousness itself. The brain-computer interface in Brainstorm represents as monumental a leap for humanity as leaving the ground for the first time. Trumbull wanted that parallel to be visually explicit. It's the kind of ambitious thematic gesture that defines his approach to science fiction. He wasn't just making an entertaining thriller. He was making a philosophical argument about human evolution and the risks we take when we push beyond natural limitations. 12. Real NASA technology. The optical tape shown in the film to store recorded memories wasn't just a Hollywood prop invented by the art department. It was based on real technology that NASA was using in the early 1980s for high-density data storage on spacecraft and satellites. Trumbull insisted on incorporating genuine scientific research into the film's production design, giving Brainstorm a layer of hard science credibility that most science fiction films completely ignore. The decision to use real NASA tech instead of making something flashier and more cinematic gives the movie an eerie plausibility. This isn't some far future fantasy. It's technology that already existed being extrapolated one logical step forward. That grounding in reality makes the darker implications of the story feel more immediate and threatening. 13. A career-ending trauma. The production of Brainstorm was so traumatic for Douglas Trumbull, between the death of Natalie Wood, the legal war with MGM, and the compromises forced on his vision, that he made a vow. He would never direct another Hollywood film. He kept that promise. Trumbull spent the rest of his career focusing on visual effects work and designing rides for theme parks, where he had complete creative control without studio interference. It's one of the great tragedies of cinema. A director with Trumbull's technical genius and philosophical ambition made only 2 theatrical films before walking away forever. Brainstorm broke him in a way he never recovered from. Hollywood lost a visionary who could have pushed the medium in genuinely innovative directions if the system hadn't destroyed him first. 14. The vomit camera. To capture the disorienting feeling of the memory headset, Douglas Trumbull refused to use standard camera rigs. He built a custom, lightweight 70mm camera and mounted it to a helmet. Then he forced his camera operators to ride on high-speed roller coasters and perform dangerous stunts to get first-person footage. The physical toll was so high that several crew members suffered from extreme motion sickness and vertigo. They nicknamed the rig the vomit camera. This pioneered the shaky cam first-person perspective that would later become a staple in modern action movies and VR gaming. Trumbull was inventing techniques decades before the industry caught up. 15. The PG censorship battle. Here's the most shocking thing about Brainstorm. Despite featuring graphic sexual loop sequences, implications of the military using the device to torture children, and a literal first-person point of view of a fatal heart attack, the film was released with a PG rating. This was 1983, 1 year before the PG-13 rating was invented. Parents took their children to see Brainstorm expecting a family-friendly sci-fi adventure. Instead, they walked into a film that investigated the metaphysics of hell and the mechanics of recorded orgasms. The backlash was enormous. Parent groups were furious that the MPAA had allowed such adult content to be marketed to children. Brainstorm became one of the key films that pushed the industry toward creating a middle rating between PG and R. It helped change how Hollywood classifies content forever. 16. the Heaven and Hell alternate footage. There's a persistent legend among fans that a much darker, longer version of the ending exists somewhere in a vault. Douglas Trumbull reportedly filmed extensive, nightmare-inducing footage of hell that was cut late in production because test audiences found it too disturbing for a mainstream release. The final film shows a relatively peaceful, almost religious vision of the afterlife during the death recording sequence. The original plan was to show a much more balanced and terrifying vision that included both heaven and hell, light and darkness. This would have completely shifted the film's tone from an optimistic sci-fi thriller to something closer to supernatural horror. Trumbull has never confirmed or denied the existence of this footage, but enough crew members have mentioned it over the years that many believe it's real, simply locked away, too disturbing to ever be released to the public. So did you know that Brainstorm was almost killed for insurance money? Or that it predicted VR addiction decades before the internet existed? All of that somehow became a cult classic that helped create the PG-13 rating. Which behind-the-scenes fact surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. If you want more stories about the movies that almost didn't make it to the screen, hit subscribe. See you in the next one.